continue our series, The Storied Life. This is session 4. I am your guide, Bob Osborne. I'd love to know how this material is helping you so far. I can be reached through the website you will see posted at the end of this video. Let me give you a picture of what we're trying to do in this series. And it comes from a class I took last summer. And yes, I know, I'm still in school, always learning. The assignment was to simply sit with a painting for a while. Take some time, study it, and then write about what I saw and felt. That's it. But my instructor was very clear. Don't rush, he said. Take a whole 30 minutes at least. So have you ever looked at an image for that long? I don't think I ever had. My wife and I like to visit art galleries when we travel, and we've seen some amazing and famous works of art. But I have to confess that I seldom, if ever, ponder an image. So in Omaha, Nebraska, in the excellent Joslin Museum there, I found this, entitled Portrait of Dirk van Os, painted in 1658 by the beloved Dutch artist Rembrandt himself. Yes, it's a Rembrandt. And Rembrandt pondered this man, so I pondered him too. And I didn't rush away. And what happens when you ponder something? What happens when you slow down and look at something for a bit? Well, you begin to see more, don't you? So look at this image with me for a bit. The painting is quite dark, really, isn't it? The man is dressed in black. Everything behind the man is in shadow. And actually, there's not much in the background. Not really at all. The focus seems to be almost entirely on the man's face and on his hands too, especially his right hand. So what might that mean as we ponder it? Perhaps the artist wants us to consider who the man is, not what surrounds him. The focus is on face and hands, on what is certainly most characteristically personal. So this image is about the man, not what surrounds the man. And we notice he holds some kind of staff in his hand, perhaps a symbol of his importance, his authority maybe. His clothes look like fine clothes, all indicators that this is a man of status maybe, of achievement. But again, what does the artist want us to consider about his subject? So study his face for a while. He's in a reflective mood, don't you think? Perhaps he's remembering his life, the life he's already lived, but maybe not entirely. Maybe he is thinking about what he still needs to do. I think the clue might be in his right hand, his strong hand, which has quite a bit of light on it. Do you notice that? Perhaps this man, though of mature years, still has some strength in him. Now, if you and I sit and ponder the man, what begins to happen inside of us? And I can tell you what happens for me. I see myself in this image. I'm not sure how old this guy is. I think he looks a bit older than me, but maybe put him in jeans and a t-shirt, and he would look a bit younger. But I see myself here. I see my life symbolized. I see what it means to hold a lot of experience and memory while still carrying ambitions to do more. And I think this is what art can do for us, whether it's an image, a song, or a story. C.S. Lewis described art as the same in the other. The same in the other. Hold on to that phrase. Good art, Lewis was saying, has this ability to show us something, maybe about life perhaps, or value, or maybe to expose a feeling, or maybe to show us where hope lies. Who knows? But in the form of something else. And this is why I think that we are so hungry for good stories. We need stories about other people in order to understand our own storied lives. we come to see the same in the other. Today, I'm inviting you to consider some of the symbols that represent your storied life. Now, what do I mean by symbol? I mean simply the way some aspect of your story might find itself represented by an object or perhaps by an image. Perhaps a moment or season of your life could be represented by some material object, or maybe something you have felt or experienced could be pictured somehow. If I were to choose a few symbols to tell my story, I think I would choose a basketball, a book, and a folding chair. These would tell my story up to a point, up to probably midlife. I'm not yet sure how to symbolize this particular era of my life. I need more time and perspective, I think. As Kierkegaard said, life is lived forward but understood backwards. So I still need time to find a symbol for this present moment, and you may feel the same. You may need some time. But what I'm suggesting is today, at the close of this session, ask yourself what a few of your symbols might be. And as I continue to talk right now, see what begins to stir in your imagination in this regard. Now, this is Northrop Frye, one of our truly great Canadian thinkers, and it's a shame so few of us Canadians know about him. He was a professor of literature at the University of Toronto for many years, considered one of the best interpreters of our whole literary tradition. And you could say he was a man who saw deeply into life and meaning. And I have read Frye with profit. Frye often said that one needed a familiarity with the Bible to know how our stories actually work. And then he would point out how symbols and metaphors and images echo through all good stories, including the biblical stories. Because in the Bible, we find symbolic value in things like water and wind, trees, deserts, mountains, cities, and even in our human faculties like seeing and breathing and hearing. These are not just things in themselves, but they are symbols of meaning in our stories. And that is because I think meanings sometimes are hard to capture by exact words. So that's why I'm asking you then, how might a few appropriate symbols help you tell the meaning of your own storied life? I used to wear a college letter jacket in my younger days because it told everyone I had played varsity basketball. It was a piece of clothing, of course, but it was a symbol, wasn't it? I said before that if I was choosing a basic symbol of my story, it would be a book. I have had this devotion to books since my mid-20s, and I think it's a good thing. But it can also be a problem, as my wife would say, a space problem, because I love real paper books and I love the form of a book. So let me tell you then about a small piece of my story through the symbol of a book. Back when I was a young pastor, I met another young man named Neil. Neil was maybe 21, 22. I was only 28, the new pastor in that small Alberta town, Lloydminster, in fact. Neil and I became fast friends, but this is what you need to know. Neil had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And over those next few years, his physical abilities would decline very quickly. Neil wanted to talk about what was going on with him, how he could understand his struggle through the lens of his Christian faith, perhaps what he could pray for, and maybe what he should expect. And he would ask to borrow books, and I would loan him whatever I thought might help, whatever he was interested in. One day I came back to my office and I found this bag laying outside my office. Neil had returned some books, and one happened to be very scuffed up with the jacket all scraped. So here, I'll put it on screen for you to see. There was actual gravel embedded in the hardcover. It was a beaten up book for sure. It was diminished. Neil later told me he had fallen while riding his bike. He had taken quite the spill. And that was happening more and more. And I'm ashamed to say this, but when I first saw the book, I didn't like it at all. My book was now damaged. That was my first take until Neil filled me in on what had happened. And I realized my shortcomings the instant he told me. It wasn't too many years later, maybe 7 or 8 years later, that I got word that Neil had passed away. And my heart sank. I hadn't seen him in the years since I'd left Lloydminster. How does that happen? What does this say about us when we are strong and busy, when our lives are so important we can't call an old friend? But when I heard Neil passed, I got up and I went over to my library bookshelf and found that scuffed and scarred book, which I still had. I picked it up and I cried. Do you have any symbols in your life that remind you of times or of people or of experiences? Or maybe about how you have changed or grown in some way? I would like us to consider the story of Joseph in Genesis 37 to 50. I made brief mention of Joseph at the end of our second session where I said his story carries this common three-part shape: a promising beginning, a difficult middle section, and finally the long hoped-for resolution. And this, I said, is the basic shape of the whole story of the Bible at large: the promising beginning, the challenge in the middle, the final good end. It's the basic shape of the Jesus story itself. So far, I have not talked about Jesus at all in this series. I will do so in sessions to come. But for now, consider that the Joseph story somehow foreshadows the Jesus story to come. It is, mysteriously, as C.S. Lewis said, the same in the other. What I want to do here is draw out one aspect of the Joseph story. Remember, we are talking about how symbols work, and the defining symbol in the Joseph story is his clothing. We might say that just as David's early story is symbolized by his sling, and Jonah by his encounter with the big fish, so Joseph's story is told by his coat or his series of coats. Now, clothes make the man, we say, but in this case, clothes tell the story. So there is, of course, a long background to the clothing motif in the biblical stories. With Adam and Eve, when they're exposed in their failure, they're given clothes to wear, it says. Clothes are for protection, but they're also symbolic of our, desire to hide from our shame. And when Jacob wants to steal his brother's blessing from their blind father Isaac, he dresses up in Esau's clothes, doesn't he? Clothing, we could say, is part costume, part identity marker. Clothes have symbolic value. So in the story of Joseph, we are told that when he is young, he is given this special coat by his doting father, a piece of clothing to mark him off from his brothers. It's almost the clothing of royalty. And Joseph dreams. He's a dreamer. He dreams of something like a kingly future. He is young when this is happening. Is he worthy of it? I guess we could ask that. Well, we know at least that his brothers resent him because of the favor his clothes represent. The story shifts when the brothers decide they've had enough of Joseph. They will get rid of him. And here's the text. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. And they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now, Joseph is separated or disrobed. He's separated from what marks him outwardly as special and favored, his clothing. He is stripped of what identifies him. And who and what will he be now? The story moves to Egypt as Joseph is sold into slavery, and we could say his disrobing continues. When his master's wife wants to sleep with him, she grabs his garment, but Joseph, wanting to preserve faithfulness to his master, flees the scene, leaving his garment behind. The left behind garment ends up sending him to jail. So think now. When we first meet Joseph, he is 17 and robed in the finest clothes. He dreams of a special future. And now as we follow him into the middle of his story, we find him stripped of his identity, dressed first in the clothes of a slave and then as a prisoner. And this will be Joseph's reality for 13 long years. And during that long time, there will be nothing visible, nothing around surrounding Joseph to tell us who he is. The winds of change usually arrive in subtle ways, don't they? Because all of a sudden, Joseph's fellow prisoners begin to dream, and he interprets their dreams accurately. And then Pharaoh begins to dream, and this is when Joseph is remembered. He has a gift for dreams, for seeing and understanding the things that are hard to understand. And so he is called on. And when Joseph tells Pharaoh the meaning of his dreams and what he should do in light of those dreams, Pharaoh is so overcome that he decides to make Joseph second in all of Egypt, only under his authority. And now here comes the moment where all this is symbolized in the text. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger, and he dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And people shouted before him, "Make way!" And thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. The resolution to Joseph's story is when he is reclothed, dressed in kingly robes, the clothes he was meant to wear from his beginning. Remember that principle we've already talked about. T.S. Eliot said, "In my beginning is my end." There is much more to the story of Joseph, of course, and all is worth investigating. Many who enter this story more deeply see something here that resonates with the story of Jesus, which will come thousands of years later. And I tend to agree. There are depths of meaning and symbolism everywhere present. But I've asked that we notice the clothing. So consider this then. There are pieces of your story that symbolize the meanings you are experiencing. What might these symbols be? I end each talk by offering some questions for reflection. So here's what I think might be most appropriate for today. I asked you in our very first session, as you recall, for the moments or the scenes from your life that tell your story. I asked for a handful of those, maybe 5, 6, 7 at most. Now, go back to those scenes and ask yourself, are there any symbols or representations that capture the meanings here in these moments? You can take your time, but finding some symbols might help you actually go deeper into your story. You might feel it. You might see aspects of it. And then as you gather these symbols together, learn to tell your story through them. Can you do this? As I told you earlier, I could probably tell at least the first half of my life by means of a basketball, a book, and a folding chair. I'm not quite sure yet what should symbolize this present season, but it is emerging for me. So take your time with this if it's not clear at first for you. But I think if if you stay with the question of what might symbolize the various pieces of your life, such things will emerge for you. Now, finally, consider choosing a defining symbol for your whole life story, something that endures for you through all the seasons, the episodes, the changes. You might explore how this symbol first came to you, why it's important to you, what it means to you, and perhaps how it has even morphed and changed its meaning over time, like a book has for me. Again, don't worry if things are not immediately clear here. Things will get clear if you allow your heart to ponder. One last thought. For the first time in this particular session, I mentioned Jesus. I'm going to tell a few Jesus stories in upcoming sessions. Stories told by Jesus as well as stories about Jesus. And I will do that because I personally feel that the Jesus story is the single greatest story ever told. If we allow ourselves to be present to it, we find this sense of recognition. We somehow see ourselves, our humanity, our broken humanity too, but also our hope. As I end today, consider the central image or symbol of Jesus' life. What is that? It's his cross, of course. He is the man on the cross. He is the suffering man, the innocent and good man who takes all of the wrong and somehow makes it right. Like a filter that purifies water. The cross is a real moment in the story of Jesus, a real historical moment, but it also remains now with us as the symbol of the whole story. So next time you see a cross, remember the story and learn to pay attention to the meaning of symbols. I will see you next time.